Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Cristian Nane y bienvenidos al Cybersecurity Seminars. Hoy tenemos una charla excepcional para ustedes. Vamos a estar hablando de los ataques, de las brechas, incidentes que están sucediendo en el mundo y en la región. Pero antes que eso, empezamos con un video introductorio.
SISAP, Sistemas Aplicativos. Durante este tiempo, hemos incursionado en muchas áreas de la tecnología de la información, liderando el mercado a través de la innovación, calidad y servicio al cliente, ofreciendo los siguientes servicios. Arquitectura. RIF-DR, Equipo de Respuesta a Incidentes Forenses Data Recovery. Ingeniería y Soporte. PMO. SOC. Consultoría. Outsourcing. Capacitaciones. Y Customer Success. Realizamos operaciones en distintos países como Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panamá y República Dominicana. Además, nuestros clientes están situados en Estados Unidos, México, Centroamérica, Colombia, Ecuador, Perú, Chile, Brasil y otros países. Nuestro SOC en Guatemala se sitúa en el edificio Forum Zona Viva. Además, contamos con un segundo SOC en la ciudad de Panamá. Actualmente SISAP está certificado como CERT por parte de la Universidad de Carnegie Mellon, que a través de su software, Engineering Institute, nos ha dado entrada a su red de CERTs. Nuestro personal cuenta con más de 70 certificaciones de SIEM, Malware Reverse Engineering, Penetration Testing, Forensics, Incident Response, entre otras. SISAP, con más de 150 ingenieros trabajando para sus socios comerciales, con más de 1000 certificaciones, alianzas estratégicas con Nova Coast, IBM, Verizon, Contributor de Verizon, en donde SISAP contribuye generando reportes e información local recolectada, alimentando el reporte de este año, poniendo en el mapa la región de Centroamérica y el Caribe, que no habían tenido datos significativos anteriormente. También estamos certificados por FIRST, que es una confederación internacional de equipos confiables de respuesta a incidentes informáticos, que manejan cooperativamente incidentes de seguridad informática y promueven programas de prevención de incidentes. SISAP, Sistemas Aplicativos.
Bienvenidos de regreso todos. El día de hoy vamos a tener la charla va a ser en inglés, entonces a todos los que quieran escucharla en español, tenemos traducción en vivo y lo pueden ver a través de los botones que están abajo para poder escoger el canal en español o mantenerse en el canal en inglés. So, hi Mike, how you doing?
Good, Christian. Good to see you again. Long time no see.
Definitely. I hope you're having a great day.
Yeah, it's Thursday, so we're getting closer to the weekend. So, always look forward to the weekends. But yeah, it's been a good day so far. And I appreciate you inviting me today. So it makes it an even better day.
Excellent. Okay. So to introduce you a little bit, we're going to be talking today about the most lethal cyber attack in our region, but as a whole talking about the incidents and breaches that have been happening worldwide. To introduce you who is Mike, Mike has over 30 years of experience in networking and network security, and of those 30 years, 16 of them have been at Verizon. He's actually leading right now the Verizon Cyber Risk Programs team and global teams of delivering cybersecurity assessments tied back to Verizon DBIR and CIS controls. Previously, Mike led the MSS Security Services Advisor and Client Security Engineering teams and has also led the Verizon Government Network and Security Operation teams within Verizon and has built and run networks and security operations for US and government agencies. So Mike, I understand you have a presentation for us that you're going to be showing us so we can start the conversation going.
All righty. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I wanted to do is talk about, some of those lethal cyber attacks that we're seeing around the world, as well as in Latin America. I mean, there's a lot of things we're seeing And I'm sure a lot of your customers and partners are seeing a lot of the same things that we are. We're seeing in a wave after wave of essentially ransomware coming in via phishing or other methodologies. But those are some of the most frequent things and most devastating things we're seeing today. But what I wanted to do is kind of talk about the cyber threat landscape, as we talk about it in the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, as well as some of our other reports. And these are all available for download from the Verizon site. I mean, the DBIR, the Cyber Espionage Report, our Mobile Security Index Report, Insider Threat, Payment Security Report, as well as Incident Preparedness and Response Report, and a whole lot of other white papers, blogs, and other information that's up there. And working with Sistemas Aplicativos, I mean, we've been working on a lot of these things together for years.
Mike, could you full screen the presentation just so we can see it better?
It is pretty much full. Hang on, let's get here. That's here. Let me go to this view, and let's do the slide master view. That's not doing it. Hang on, let me fix that. Let me get that back up there. Let's go back. Come on, go back. Hang on. Let me stop sharing for a second and restart it there. There we are. Can you see it now?
No, we're still seeing your PowerPoint presentation actually from this side.
I'm sorry, what are you seeing? You're not seeing the PowerPoint?
No, give me a second.
Let me stop sharing here. And let's see if we can get that restarted again. All right, let's see if it'll play now. I think what happened is I think my connection had actually dropped.
Okay, give me 1 second.
I think you had a frozen screen.
I think we have it up right now, Mike, so we can continue.
You have it up?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Are you driving that or am I driving that? Because I'm not sure.
I can drive it from here.
Okay. Yeah. Because I think my screen had frozen over there on that system. So.
Okay.
Okay. So as I was saying, we're gonna all these different reports are available to everyone online, but the main one I'm going to focus on today is what we're talking about in our Verizon Data Breach Investigations report. Those findings that we see, around the globe and in each region. So we've got some information, that's global in nature, but I've also got some information that we can show specific to the Latin America region because I figured that would be of value to you.
Excellent.
So, yeah, if you're driving, there we go. Yeah. This is just a proprietary statement that we have in all our presentation decks that say it's Verizon stuff. So we can go on to the next slide. So as many of you are probably aware, Verizon has been producing this data breach investigations report. This is our 14th iteration, this year, the 2021 version. We're covering incidents and breaches and information we receive from 88 countries, 83 different contributors around the globe. And if you look at the back page of the DBIR, you'll see all those contributors. And you'll notice some interesting things there. A lot of law enforcement agencies from around the globe, as well as some of our competitors and vendors we use. And that's one thing I actually like about this industry is everybody shares information. So a lot of good information. Sistemas Aplicativos is a contributor as well, particularly for incidents and breaches in the Latin America region. But you can see, almost 80,000 total incidents were reviewed, over 29,000 quality incidents, and that means where we've got a lot of really good data and information, and over 5,000 breaches were reviewed in this year's report. So if we go on next slide.
Before we go to the next slide, one of the things that a lot of people say is that this is one of the reports that is used industry-wide as a benchmark to understand what happened last year. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. If you go to a lot of trade shows or security conferences, particularly when you walk around the floor where a lot of different vendors are, you'll see them, a lot of times mention, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report says this, so we built this to help address that. Or because the Data Breach Investigations Report over years has been finding these types of things, we built a service or an application or a tool or platform, whatever it may be, to help organizations address those things that the DBIR talks about that were what led to these types of incidents and breaches, and we think that is a way to help organizations. So yeah, a lot of organizations do that, and we're fine with that. We also have a lot of services that we've built around it as well, because it is really good information. And for example, our cyber risk monitoring and cyber risk programs are built on the Data Breach Investigation Report findings to help organizations improve their overall security and risk posture, because we can do assessments against what those findings are, those patterns, how they were done, and help organizations identify where they may be susceptible to those, regardless of the organization's size or their market or vertical.
Excellent.
So when you get into the DBR, you find out that it's based on what's known as the VERIS framework. And VERIS is a vocabulary for event recording and incident sharing. It is an open system. Anyone can contribute to it. We have the links there in the lower left-hand corner on this slide that you can access. And anyone can log in and see that and get an understanding of how VERIS works and how you can contribute to that to report any incidents or breaches you may be aware of or involved in. So VERIS is a set of metrics, and we like to say it helps provide a common language for describing security incidents in a standard, structured, repeatable manner, meaning everybody's using the same terminology for the same things. One of the things we see in a lot of industries, and it does happen in ours as well, where people will use the same acronym or the same term, and it may mean multiple different things depending upon the context. Well, in VERIS, we use the same language for everything, and that helps reduce confusion and provide more of a structured and standard, if you will. Okay. And one of the things that the VERIS has done is it's now employed what they call the A4 threat model. And it was developed by the Verizon VTRAC team, and VTRAC is Verizon Threat Research Analysis Center. That's what VTRAC stands for. And it's a way to help organizations, answer those key questions. Who were the actors? I mean, who were the bad actors, and whose actions were they that impacted that asset, where either that breach or that incident occurred? What actions did they use? The assets that were affected, and how were they affecting? What are those attributes that affected that asset? So it's actors, actions, assets, and attributes. And so you'll see that throughout the DBIR, particularly this year's report, because they're really stressing that. That's something that we have found has really helped in that standardization in talking about incidents and breaches.
Fantastic.
So the other thing you'll notice in this year's DBIR is we've started mapping the VERIS framework and the CIS controls together. So as I mentioned, our Verizon cyber risk assessments and our cyber risk monitoring tied back to VERIS and the CIS controls. And this is one way we do it. And that's what they've done here, and what they're showing is showing how that mapping is. If you look across the table on the right, the bottom there are those DBIR threat patterns. And then the upper blocks with the yellow, the reds, and the orange is that mapping to the 18 CIS controls. As you know, it used to be the CIS top 20, but the latest version, it's 18 controls now. So we just say CIS controls instead of the top 20 as we used to.
So,
but it's a very good way to really help you, because those CIS controls are used and grounded in a lot of different risk, compliance, and regulatory security frameworks.
From what I can see, this is based on CIS Controls Implementation Group 3, right? And what would be the impact regarding for our listeners of implementing these control groups with regards to the DBIR?
Well, the nice thing about implementing these controls is, as I mentioned previously, they're also in a lot of other frameworks, compliance and regulatory. And if you implement the CIS controls, it will go a long way to helping you improve your overall security and risk posture if you can meet all those control requirements. And that is a challenge. I mean, people say, oh, it's only 18 controls. Well, there's a lot of things involved in those 18 controls. Mm-hmm. And that's why, organizations like ours and many others do assessments and audits to help organizations see just where they're at in that implementation and the effectiveness of the implementation of those controls in their environment.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. This is a chart I found very interesting this year. For years we've talked about how it takes forever for someone to identify that something's happened in their network. But this graph I found really interesting this year because you can see that timeline is shrinking. It is dropping significantly. It's attributable to a lot of organizations, reading the DBIR, understanding it, and taking measures based on that. And that's something that we want to see. That's good for everybody, to see those kind of results from the actions, from reading the DBIR, understanding it, and then taking steps to improve overall security and risk posture, by following those recommendations, in the DBIR as well as from other sources.
From what we can see here is that discovery is in the days time where the company actually finds the attacker, right? I remember back in 2017, 2018, that was in the months range, the biggest part, even years to actually discover it.
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, during those times as well, the discovery wasn't even done by the organization that had been attacked. It was done by law enforcement agencies, company like ours, where we told them, hey, you're breached. So during that time frame, I remember that it happened that people started to say don't assume you're not breached, assume you are, and then act accordingly. Do you think that's still a valid viewpoint to take towards security?
I think it is. I think it's very hard. I challenge anybody who tells me that they're 100% secure. I don't think you are. I don't think anybody is. I don't think anybody ever truly will be. I think people have, organizations in particular have gotten a lot better about understanding the impacts to an organization of a major incident or a breach. I mean, I think organizations have seen the last several years, particularly with ransomware, the devastating impact that has on an organization. It impacts the organization as a whole, their brand and reputation. It impacts the employees. It impacts their customers, their partners, their vendors. And we've seen organizations actually go out of business because of ransomware. It's usually the smaller ones that can't afford to pay and they just can never get back online, or it's too costly for them. We've seen large organizations pay out millions in ransomware. I mean, and they could have spent a lot less than that to prevent that. So I think organizations are starting to learn, really starting to learn. And I think the security industry itself has learned how to present this kind of information back to board of directors to help get the funding they need to address these holes to protect the organization.
Okay. One of the things I want to put out there for the listeners and viewers is that even if you look at these graphs, it takes days to discover most of the incidents, if not months. But look at the graphs in talking about compromise and exfiltration of data. It happens in minutes. So we need to actually be able to breach that gap that we have in between days and minutes, because if we're giving that much time to an attacker, we're giving them our entire set of data. So we need to actually move that timeline as close as we can to actually be able to protect our data better and incur on less breaches?
So this is going to be a little bit deeper dive into the A4 threat model. I'm not going to get too deep into it because I think everybody can pull this down and read it. And again, we've got the links right on here to the Verus framework and the A4 threat model and the Verus schema. But again, the key thing is the actors, the actions, the assets, and the attributes. Whose actions affected the asset? What were those actions? What assets were affected? And then how were they affected? Were they compromised? Were they destroyed? Were they just broken into and data exfiltrated? So understanding all those things really helps understand what happened, how it happened, why it happened. So then we can determine what the best course of action is to have everybody back.
Everybody, we had some technical issues, but we're back online. So Mike, you were talking about the deep dive into the Verus framework.
Right, and I think it was just finishing up and talking about how the A4 threat model is really helped make it a little bit easier for people to provide information about incidents and breaches with the actors, actions, assets, and attributes, because that really helps people understand what it is they need to know about those breaches. Who were the actors, what actions did they take to affect the asset, which assets were affected, and how were they affected, because those are all key things to understand so that what happened, how to address the issue, and then hopefully how to protect yourself from that happening again. And it's not just yourself. I mean, it helps out not just yourself, but others in your market, your vertical, your peers and others as well. And that's one of the things that I really like about the Verus framework, it being open. Anyone can contribute and provide this kind of information about an incident or a breach that they've had.
So,
I mean, that's a key thing, sharing that information so everyone is aware of what happened, how, why, and all.
So for the audience, how anonymized is this information? Because you're talking about which assets are affected. What type of information are you actually looking there? Because if the moment I put my assets in there, it's going to be not that anonymous.
Well, and again, because you are the ones putting that information in about your breach, you control how much information you put in. I mean, you can anonymize, things. You can just say, I had this server running this without identifying, the IP address or, what applications were running on it. Or if you say, I had an application that handled, let's say, I had an application that handled my payroll. Without identifying this specific application, you can still identify what happened, what led to that, what you found, what did the actor do, what actions did they take, and you can say it was a financial or a payroll type applications, and it was impacted in this way. So again, you as the person putting in can control just how granular that information is. If some information is better than no information.
Definitely. And if you have to rank it from like 1 being extremely easy to report an incident to 10 being highly complicated, where would you rank that?
Well, like anything, the first time or two you put something in there, it'll probably be a little bit more challenging because you've not gone through it before. But as you put more in, the easier it gets. It's one of those things that, the more you do, the better you get at it, and the better information you can provide and the greater help it is.
Okay, thank you. And just so you guys know, we're actually a contributor for the DBIR, and if you don't want to go through the process of reporting the incidents or breaches yourself, you can actually contact us. We will do the work for you, and we'll call you, we'll do an interview with you, just because we believe that sharing this information is of really high value, because the more we work together towards having
Indeed.
a whole set of data, actually, the more wholesome that data actually becomes, the better prepared we're going to be to combat future incidents and breaches.
Agreed. So when we talk about the actors, what we're talking about was the bad actor external? Was it somebody internal? Did you have a disgruntled employee or a partner? You know, a lot of organizations have connections with their partners and partner networks. So that's one of the first things we need to know. Who was that actor? Was it somebody within? And you can look at our internal threat report, you know, that we showed earlier to learn more about that. Was it a partner? You know, do you have a disgruntled partner, or was it an accidental thing from a partner, or was it external? Usually, when it's external, it's somebody who's, you know, purposely doing something. Internal and partner sometimes are accidental, whereas external generally are not. But again, you know, the first thing is, you know, who was it? And you know, internal, external, or, you know, one of those partner connections.
Excellent. Easy enough.
And if you'll notice on this one, you can see that generally that actor is, if you look at that graph on the right, the upper graph on the right, you can see that it's generally external. That's generally still where we're seeing a lot of the activity happen. You know, that's who that bad actor is. Followed, not closely behind, but, you know, followed by internal. And internal, again, a lot of times those actors, you know, are actually unintentional. A mistake, an error, a coding error, for example, may cause something. You know, we see that happen fairly regularly. You know, you see it on the news. You know, this airline was down due to something they did. They did a software update, and somebody did something, didn't get tested, or something happened, wasn't taken into consideration, and it brought down the entire network. Is that a security incident? Was it just a networking incident? But those are the things that organizations have to figure out, you know, when it's an internal. Was it malicious intent, or was it accidental? And that same holds true with partners. Is a lot of times you need to figure out, was that intentional, or was it accidental? Or was it accidentally on purpose? But that's what, you know, we see a lot, is that it's external. But that motivation, regardless of whether it's internal, external, or partner, when it is intentional, it generally all boils down to the same thing: money. That's the biggest motivator, is financial impact. And it may be, you know, a lot of people think financial, oh, they're going after money. Well, sometimes they're not going after the money. They're going after, you know, the organization they feel shouldn't be getting that money, or is, you know, getting it in a way that's, you know, not socially or politically or whatever acceptable to them. And so they're trying to attack it and hurt them financially, either by taking it or damaging their ability to collect money. And then the other thing we're seeing, you know, when it's external, you can see from that graph on the left, it's a lot of organized crime is involved there.
I can see that.
And that's organized crime from around the world, not just in any one location. It's, you know, that's one thing about the internet. Somebody sitting in their kitchen in Belize can attack somebody who's got a business in Belarus. So
and that's very, very accurate, because a lot of the ransomware events we have been seeing actually originate from Nigeria. So it's very, very accurate to see that type of behavior, because we're not really safe, even though we're in Guatemala or any place in Latin America. The internet connects us all, and we're seconds in distance from any other country. Well, you're in the States,
yeah,
and we're talking, and we're video chatting. So it has changed.
Exactly.
The internet has changed everything.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sitting here in Colorado, speaking with you in Guatemala, and I'm sure there's people from, you know, other parts of the world on this call as well. I've had somebody trying to, you know, talk to me on my Slack channel who's in Asia Pacific right now. I had to tell them later. I'll get back to you later. But again, that's the connected world. It is a global market. It is a global marketplace, and we're all citizens in this global marketplace, and that's a good thing. We have this capability to talk to each other. Like I said, Christian, good to see you. We haven't seen each other in person now in a couple of years because of the global pandemic. Hopefully, we'll be able to see each other again soon. But again, this capability allows us to stay in touch.
Definitely.
So when we talk about actions, these are the ones that we mostly talk about, and these are the ones that you see in the DBIR. These are the misuse, social errors, malware, hacking, physical, environmental, and they all have their specific categories on what's happening in these various areas. Misuse, somebody intentionally misusing something, social engineering, an error. We see errors all the time. We do a lot of assessments. We assess web and mobile applications, and we actually see a lot of coding errors, particularly in that area, which is one reason why web applications are pretty high vectors across all markets. Mm-hmm. Malware, yep, that's coming in a lot of different ways, usually through phishing and other things. But there's those bad actors doing the hacking, trying to break in, breach systems. Physical compromise, we see that happen on the news almost every day. Some smash and grabs, if you will. And then there's just environmental conditions, and environmental means a lot of different things. But again, it's what action affected that asset. Was it environmental? Did somebody hack into an organization and adjust thermostats in a room where you had a lot of equipment? So instead of keeping it at a nice, cool 65 degrees, they jacked the temperature up to 120 and equipment started failing. So there's a lot of different ways, and you have to go through the DBIR, and we'll talk about all these in depth.
Okay, so one of the attacks that we've been seeing in the region, very, very prominent, and actually it's been on the news all the time, is ransomware. How would you categorize it? Because it enters the social, but it's also malware. How would you categorize ransomware?
Yeah, and that's where that investigation takes place, to figure out exactly how that came in. Did it come in through an email attachment? Did somebody come in with a thumb drive and plug it into their computer? So there's a lot of different ways that's happening. We've also seen, and that's been on the news as well, where there have been occasions where somebody has broken into a manufacturer and embedded things into firmware and into the systems themselves, and they lay dormant until that bad actor decides to fire them up. So there's a lot of different ways that ransomware is happening. Mm-hmm. The most prevalent, however, is through email, through social engineering, through getting that phishing email where people click on a link or they click on an attachment that they shouldn't. And the next thing you know, now you've got a bit of a problem.
True.
And again, so action varieties, you can see right there. I mean, phishing, social engineering is one of the top action varieties, if you will, in all breaches. You got phishing, you've got, and it's pretty kind of a small font there, but use of stolen credentials, that is still happening. And it's amazing how many people still to this day use the same ID and password on a lot of different systems. So once one is breached, they are all breached. So we see that a lot. But ransomware, via malware is it's been happening. It's trending. It continues to trend, and it's because it's so easy via social engineering. Okay, and that's why it's an easy way. We do a lot of phishing assessments, as SISAP does as well, and we see it. And one of the things that we've noticed is a lot of organizations have their own phishing and security awareness training and their own phishing programs where they phish their employees. And a lot of times, we say, we would like, we recommend we do some phishing, and they say, oh, we're already doing that. and people are pretty well trained at this point not to click on things. And we say, well, let us try it once or twice and see what happens. And what we've learned is that employees are pretty smart. They start to pick up on clues, and they can see some trends and patterns. And over time, they start to recognize when the company is phishing them as part of their annual or quarterly or semi-annual, security awareness. And so they start to recognize the patterns that the company's use in phishing. And then we'll come along and we'll completely change things up. We will time phishing for certain things. So, for example, recently it's somebody who will remain nameless. I'll just say it was a financial institution who did their own phishing. We convinced them. So right after they announced their third quarter earnings reports and it was in the news and everything, we sent all the employees an email with the third quarter financials details. Sent it to everybody. 68% of the employees opened it up.
Yeah,
because they were not used to getting that kind of email at that time. And so they had a 68% failure rate. But if you think about it, that's what the bad actors do. They look for events at organizations, and that's when they'll hit them. That's when they'll strike with something that they figure people will click on it. Just like after there's a big natural disaster, hurricanes, those kind of things, that's when bad actors like to strike and hit people with phishing campaigns, which then include ransomware. They know people want to help, and look, here's an opportunity for me to help victims of a tsunami or an earthquake or a hurricane, and they'll click on that link without realizing what they've just done. Mm-hmm. And now they're suddenly locked out of their system, and they get the little skull and crossbones that says, hey, for $5,000, you can get access to your email again.
Mm-hmm. True. One of the attacks we've been seeing in the region, the Central American area, is business email compromise. How would you categorize it here in the action varieties?
I think we'd have to understand the context of when people say business email compromise. Mm-hmm. We've seen different things there. So in some cases, it's social engineering. In some cases, it's hacking. It all depends on the methodologies used behind the business email compromise. So that's why I'm a little hesitant to say, well, it's this or it's that. We try not to do that until we have the data and the facts to say, it's this, because we want to make sure it's not a Trojan horse as well. Mm-hmm. Because that's the other thing bad actors have learned to do, is set off alarm bells over here while they're breaking in over here.
Okay.
They get everybody's attention focused in one location and then go in another.
Very interesting.
So that's the question of, what was the real intent there? Was that a diversionary tactic, or was mm-hmm. it the real tactic?
Okay.
And then we look at the assets. A lot of times you can learn a lot by what asset they were going after and why they were going after it. Was it a server, a user device, a terminal, the network, some sort of media device? And we see different things, particularly in different markets. So, a lot of times, for person, for example, personally identifiable information. Did they get information that would allow them to then break into other accounts, like their personal financial accounts or their healthcare mm-hmm. records or other things? What were they really after? And again, that's why we have those teams that do those investigations, to do that deeper dive and understand how what was the methodology. What was that actor doing, the attributes, the assets, the actor, and that's why you almost have to use all four together to figure out what really happened mm-hmm. and why, and what they're what they were truly after.
Okay.
And you can see here, the servers still dominate, and that's, due to web apps and mail server. Along with that, servers generally also hold payroll
Yeah.
and a lot of financial and personally identifiable information. Um, and the social attacks, are always, targeting people to pull, typically are targeting people via phishing emails. And again, a lot of times that's the beginning. We'll target people with phishing emails. Hopefully they'll click on something that will launch something else or bury something into a system. And that's, that may be a bot that doesn't even start up for another, 2 months just to hide. So again, you kind of have to go through all the details and do that full investigation, and that's why we have forensics teams that do these types of investigations, just like SISAP does forensics investigations as well into these big incidents and breaches.
Okay.
And then, of course, we always fall back to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. How were they affected? So did they compromise the confidentiality of the data that was being held? Was it personally identifiable information? Did they take a system down? So now, did they take down Netflix and now nobody can watch anything for the next 8 hours? Or was it integrity? Did they attack a system, change data to where now it's like, yeah, I can't trust this data. I don't know it's valid anymore because we noticed something changed, and that hurts companies just as much as the availability and the confidentiality, because when your customers and partners don't trust the data, it makes it hard to do business as well.
And talking about availability, a very good example is what happened to the Facebook Corporation a couple of days ago, where they were out of the air for, what was it, about, as you said, 8 hours?
About 8 hours, yeah.
And that was not only Facebook, and WhatsApp, and that was a big deal here because everybody communicates with WhatsApp. So from one time to another, I remember receiving a message from one of my clients, and I couldn't answer him back. It was like, yeah, it was weird.
Yeah, and again, that's one of those things. So it's availability, but then when it's availability, you also have to question, now, what else happened while that was down? If they knocked something down, if it was bad actors who took something down, did they also go in and get information while it was down? Did they do something else to now where I have to question the integrity of that system? So, I mean, that's why the old CIA is always fun. It's like, and a lot of times it's not just one. It could be two or all three are impacted.
True. And one of the things that companies need to also consider is, especially talking about that Facebook incident that happened, is that they can quantify their actual direct losses. But I can just picture the amount of loss that really was incurred for that downtime, because a lot of businesses use WhatsApp and Facebook to do normal business here. So they depended on that service, and with that service being completely down, I know this is something Facebook will never quantify, because who's going to get a lawsuit from a 3-person shop against Facebook? Let's get real, nobody's going to win that. But it's still, it's something that it would be interesting to quantify, to see how much the actual loss of not having Facebook worldwide did. Because I don't even think they know.
No, I don't think. I think it'll take them weeks to determine that, and then even then, I don't know if they would even announce what they feel it was. But I suspect, here in the United States, I'm sure somebody in Congress is going to ask. So, what was the true financial loss, not just to Facebook, but to everybody who uses Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and all their other apps that were impacted as their commerce platform,
exactly,
their B2B platform. So, what was that true impact? I'm sure to some of the small businesses that's their primary B2B interface, I mean, I'm sure that they hurt that day. They lost a lot of business. They lost a day's worth of business.
True. Completely true.
And again, this is just, some of those attribute, varieties and credentials and personal information, continues to be highly sought after. Phishing and pretexting for or social engineering. And then the malware usually occurs after hacking, use of stolen creds, brute force, but we also know that can happen via phishing as well. Mm-hmm. So of course, then there's a good old ossification, which is always fun to say, such as, ransomware encryption. So mm-hmm. That's just being, that's just doubling down on being mean, when you break in and then you do that as well.
Yeah, true.
I mean, that's somebody that's really bearing a grudge against somebody when they go to that level.
True, very true.
There's those bad actors out there that do that. And again, a lot of them being those organized crime. I mean, so.
Yeah, they just don't care at all. And one thing that I have a question about the availability variety is about 75% is, let's say, obscuration, and around 20% is loss. Within ransomware, if ransomware actually happened, but the company did not decide to pay for the data and they actually lost the data, would that be considered as loss, or would it be in both categories?
It could be in both. It all depends. I think it kind of comes down to what that data was and what that loss was. So yeah, I mean, there are plenty. I mean, in every law enforcement agency you hear says, yeah, never pay, never pay, never pay. But then again, they're not the ones that are in between that rock and a hard place. So I understand when customers do pay, but I also understand those that don't. Mm-hmm. Those that don't often have, some pretty good business continuity and disaster recovery plans. Okay. And that's something that a lot of organizations forget about, that actually does play into your overall security and risk management programs, or it should be. Having a good business continuity and disaster recovery plan to ensure you are doing backups, and those backups are clean, not impacted with any kind of hidden ransomware or anything in them. Mm-hmm. So having that done and having assessments against your business continuity and disaster recovery planning. I mean, you mentioned earlier, I used to build and run network and security operations centers. And I used to, come in sometimes, to take over management of a network and security operations center. And one of the first things I would do was a business continuity and disaster recovery drill, because mm-hmm. I wanted to see what would happen. Okay, I'm taking over this organization now. If something happens tonight, I want to know that we know what to do, that we're prepared and we have a way out. And more often than not, the first couple times that I would do that, they would be a total disaster, because organizations do not do that enough.
Yep.
And if everybody takes one thing away, please make sure you have a good business continuity disaster recovery plan, and you test it on a regular basis to make sure it does work and it is effective.
Yeah, as they say, is if you want to improve on something, you actually have to measure it. And in order to measure it, you have to try it out. You won't be able to measure if your incident response and continuity plans actually work if you have never tested them out. That's the only way to actually know. So I give that recommendation out as well, because it's definitely something that we need to constantly do.
Yeah. Okay, so the incident patterns. These are we're going to get into some of those things that we've all been talking about for years, the social engineering. But you also notice that this year we kind of changed them up. They did some cleanup, if you will, of the breach and incident patterns. Sometimes we used to call them vectors. But the new patterns explain, over 99% of breaches and analyzed incidents. And you can see what are the top patterns and breaches. And sure enough, it's that social engineering as number one. Web application attacks, and those have been on the rise for the last several years. And most organizations have at least one web page, one web application, if you will. Most have multiples. In a lot of cases, they're built in-house. Sometimes they're outsourced. But that's an area where we still find a lot of problems, particularly in coding for the web application. So that is a key area to look at. System intrusion, miscellaneous errors, privilege misuse. But then you go over to the incidents, and believe it or not, the good old DOS attack is still there. We still see those on a regular basis. But again, number two is that basic web application, and number three is social engineering, and then system intrusion. So you see a lot of the same patterns in both incidents and breaches. A lot of it just depends on the effectiveness of whatever that pattern is and what it is they're trying to do, and what they're going after as to whether it's an incident or a breach.
One thing that calls out to my attention is that it's not web application attacks, it's basic web application attacks. What would you consider a basic web application attack?
Yeah, and in the DBIR we talk a little bit about that, but it's a lot of the basic functionality in web applications, and we still see some of the basic things still not being addressed. Particularly in code. I mean, there's so many that are just so susceptible to simple things like cross-site scripting. So that's why they've kind of renamed that to a basic web application attack, because it's a lot of the basics are still not being done when organizations or individuals build web applications. There's a lot more nuance and really cool technical things when somebody does have a really good web application that some hackers, like the challenge of those well-built web apps. But a lot of it's still just basic functionality in web applications that are still susceptible. And a lot of times it's because, it's a lot of those smaller organizations that are building them themselves. It might be somebody's first time they've built a web application, or, they just don't have as much experience in doing the proper coding and building security into their web application. That leads to those kind of problems.
Okay, thanks for the explanation.
So social engineering, as we already discussed, there was a lot of those, over 1,700 breaches and over 3,800 incidents. It was all external. 100% external. And again, it's, going after the money. It's always about the money. And there's a little bit, of espionage. There's still a lot of corporate espionage that takes place these days. Mm-hmm. But again, the biggest motivator is financial. And again, it's the credentials and personal information, medical information. Other can be kind of like a mixture. There's some databases that kind of contain both personal and medical, and but again, it's they're always after the money, and okay. It's generally, as we see in last year, it was 100% external.
Well, one thing that I want to point out is that if you look at the graph on the right side, you will notice that social engineering being disclosed by the actor or being reported by an internal employee is actually very, very low. Most of the findings that we're seeing here are based on monitoring services, law enforcement, or other types actually. So it's not even the company itself noticing these problems, it's somebody else completely noticing. And one last thing I want to point out is that in the actor motives, we see that it's 95% financially attributed, but there's also a 6%, and if we add them together, we come to 101%. And this is because an incident can have two different motives at the same time. It could be espionage and financial simultaneously.
Right. And, that's a good point, because a lot of times it is double-edged. I mean, it's particularly if it's a competitor, they're trying to impact you negatively financially, while at the same time seeing if there's information they can glean as well. And the other point you mentioned about, it's found externally. That's why in our program, our cyber risk program, we do some dark web hunting because and we get alerts, for example, if an organization that's under contract, if suddenly a bunch of email addresses from that organization, and I'll just use SISAP for example, if suddenly we're monitoring SISAP and suddenly we see Christian Nani at sisap.com in a dark web or known bad actor site, we'll get an alert on that and we'll be able to forewarn you, hey, somebody's got your login credentials, so that you have an opportunity to make changes, hopefully before they can sell and utilize that information. Okay. So that's where a lot of that external reporting comes in. It's from those threat monitoring services.
Excellent. Continuing with basic web application attacks, what can you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah. As I said, that's one that we see a lot of. And, we talk about, the fact that, that actor motivation is financial and espionage. Well, with web applications, we also see, some element of, somebody's got a grudge against an organization. Or there's the good old script kiddies, that are doing it for fun. Hey, let's see if we can deface this web app. That still happens. I was actually surprised to see that was only 1% this year, because I still see that on a fairly regular basis, and the fact that it was only 1% was a little shocking to me. Okay. But again, it's. But what's also interesting is sometimes they've got internal, and I take that with again, I think that's a little bit of bad coding, whether intentional or not. But we do know that there have been cases where somebody knew they were going to get laid off or fired or whatever, and they were doing the web, and so they built in a backdoor or something into the web application they were working on. Mm-hmm. But again, the basic web application attack is going to continue. And I think it was pretty high these last couple of years, a lot of it due to COVID, and a lot of organizations realizing people, weren't in the office. They couldn't go in. They had to have other ways to do their jobs and other things. So they would build these web applications or other things. And again, a lot of them were built quickly, and maybe didn't follow all the proper security coding techniques that we like to see them do, which leaves them susceptible to a lot of these basic, errors, and then susceptible to these basic web application attacks.
Okay. I see as the top integrity varieties attack for basic web application attack, we're talking about repurposing, defacement, and software installation. What would be a repurposing of a basic web application? Because defacement and software installation, I'm guessing software installation is when they install a crypto miner, and defacement, well, yeah. We know defacement.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the defacement is the fun kids. Repurpose can be a variety of things, and so somebody can redirect it to another. So it may look like you're going to the right place, but you click on something in there and it's actually going somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So that's what that kind of repurposing is. It's like you think you're getting into a web application to do one thing, and the next thing you know, you're over somewhere else, and you think you're in the right place, but they have behind the scenes redirected you elsewhere. And then the next thing you know, somebody that you didn't intend to now has your credit card information.
True. I'm guessing in repurposing, installing malware would be in that list as well? Like having
So yeah, I mean that is one of the techniques, is installing malware that can replicate and make it look like it. And that's the other thing we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of those not. So, for example, instead of SISAP, SISAP, they come SISIP, to where it confuses people. and they don't realize they're not on the real website that they think they're on. So again, hitting that first one and putting something in, so when somebody clicks something, they're actually somewhere else. The logo, everything looks the same, but it's really not the same.
Continuing with system intrusion as the third attack pattern for this year.
Yeah, in system intrusion, a lot of times that is them planning malware or trying to break in. And again, you can see that's mostly external. There is some internal disgruntled employees, etc. Sometimes there's a little bit of inside, outside, a little collusion there between a bad external actor and somebody internal.
Okay.
But again, most of the time it's financially motivated or espionage or a combination of the two. And again, they're going after the same things, personal information, credentials, and payment information. But you see that continuing to go up. And while the data is showing that these system intrusions, it's malware, and usually what we're seeing is they like to target those payment card data in web pages, as I previously mentioned. And a lot of it, they're using stolen credentials, either that they've gotten, via social engineering, or they may have purchased off one of those sites that I mentioned earlier in the dark web. Because we see new things getting posted there every day. Somebody's broken into some place, and look, here's 250 credentials for sale for $20. If even that much. A lot of times it's like $5 for 250. So because that data is pretty cheap these days, amongst the hacker community.
Okay. Moving on to miscellaneous errors, what would this category be for miscellaneous errors?
A lot of this is, as I mentioned, there's mistakes made in coding. So they're the unintentional errors or unintentional actions. But they're not always that way. Sometimes they're kind of accidentally on purpose. But for example, if I sent an email to a customer, but actually had a different customer's, like if I was on a contract, but I had a different customer's contract attached to that, that's a miscellaneous error. That's just an error on my part. I sent an email to customer A with customer B's contract information. So now customer A knows that that's a customer, what they're paying, what services they have, etc. So that's an incident right there, because I've now compromised customer B's information to customer A.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So let's move on to regional patterns. That way we can start driving into the LATAM region and talking specifically about LATAM.
Yeah. So if you look at these, we've got the top patterns and actions for Asia Pacific, North America, and EMEA, on this page here. So you can see APAC on the left, North America, and then Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And you can see, very a lot of similarities. The social engineering, basic web application, and then we get into like 3 and 4 kind of miscellaneous errors and system intrusion. But for the most part, the top 4 for each region are the same, are very similar. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of basic web apps in EMEA, as well as the social engineering in Asia Pacific.
Okay.
And in North America, it's pretty close there. The system intrusion, social engineering, basic web apps, not as bad. And I think a lot of that's because in the U.S. there is so much B2B commerce via the internet and web apps, that it's an area that we've been really shouting from the mountaintops for years, is about those web apps. And our application security program and our application pen testing and those kind of things. A lot of organizations have gotten a lot better in North America. But as you can see, EMEA's got some work to do there, as does APAC. But I think if you go on to the next slide, we kind of touch on what's in Latin America. So when we look at Latin America, you can see some differences. So, for example, the patterns in Latin America, we're seeing the social engineering, system intrusion, but we're seeing miscellaneous errors used. And BABAP is actually pretty far down that list, for breaches. And then when you get into the incidents, it's denial of service, the intrusions, social engineering, and miscellaneous errors. And that basic web app is all the way is way down there. So to me, it was interesting to see that. And that's kind of one of those things that, well, in all this, we have to take a little bit with a grain of salt because we don't get the amount of incident and breach data out of South America as we do the other regions. Okay. We're hoping to continue to improve that, but we're just not getting the same level of information from the region.
And thank you for touching the point on that, because this is another point that I want to talk to our listeners in, because the more data we actually have, the more precise these graphs are going to be for the next year and so on. So please report your incidents either directly to Verizon or to us, and that way we can get this data, even a better quality data for our clients. Like we have been saying, the Verus framework is completely anonymous. If you report it directly to Verizon, nobody will know that it was you reporting it. And if you report to us, we're definitely going to sign a non-confidential agreement. So it'll stay with us, the breach. Even if we are not responding to the breach, or you don't want us to respond to the breach because you have another team doing it, please let us know about your incidents and breaches, because we can actually enrich this report for the Latin region the more data we pour into it.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Christian. Actually, I want everybody report them directly into SISAP, because I think then you can create, a database for in-region, in-country as well. But then that way you can then report them into the Verus framework, and they would just show, if there was any question about where this came from, it came through via SISAP, who's a known contributor to the report anyway. So, if anybody has any concerns about reporting it themselves through the Verus framework, please, go through SISAP. They'll take care of everything, and you'll remain completely anonymous. But again, you may feel more comfort, a greater level of comfort, disclosing information about the incident or breach to SISAP than you may, in the Verus framework or back to Verizon. We do just ask that you do report it, so we can get that data, that information, because that will help not only you, but it'll help every other business and organization in Latin America.
Thank you, Mike. So we're going to be moving towards the demo of the interactive DBIR. Where is it now? So I'm controlling, so you need to let me know what. If you want to ask for control.
Well, you want me to?
Yeah, ask for
control.
control.
Me to take control?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let me see.
So, Mike, what are you showing us here in this application?
So this is what's known as the interactive DBIR site. So in here, we can look at a lot of different things. So there's geographics, there's breach trends, actions, breach events, data types, patterns, and industries. And what that means is I can come down, I can just scroll down. Let me close. Hopefully you guys can still see that. And so all the countries that you see in blue on this screen in South America, you can see these are the countries that, and what's really interesting is I can go and look. So for example, right now it's set to 2020, but it's going to go all the way back to to 2009. I can look at all incidents and by the various pattern. So let's just go with, we'll just start with the basic web application attack. And you can see the different colors for each region, but sometimes that gets a little muddy, if you will. So I can just say, just show me just Latin America. And now it's just showing me the data specific to Latin America. And this is all incidents where the pattern was the basic web application. You can see what they were going all the way back, from 2010 through 2020. Because the 2020 BIR is actually about incidents and breaches from 2020. But you can see what those counts were for each year, the number of incidents. And that is, it's pretty interesting to see. It was 2013 where that was a big issue in Latin America. But as you can see, the last several years, it is, really calmed down. And again, this is based on the reports we get. It may be worse than this, but, based on the information we have, this is what we can report on that. And this, again, was for incidents. I can also switch it to breaches and do the same thing. You can see the breaches, again, we're seeing, a little bit higher numbers in 2018 and in 2012. But it's interesting that you can go through this and see where those things are. We look at denial of service, for example, which was, flat for breaches, but when we went to incidents, we suddenly saw a huge spike in incidents, particularly in 2019. They did drop off in 2020. So that's why this is a really interesting site. You can go in and look at, all these different things. We can, look at anything else you want to look at. Privilege, miscellaneous errors. You can see from an incidence perspective how those have trended over the last 10 years for incidents. And then when I do breaches only, you can see how that is on breaches as well, on how miscellaneous errors contribute to those. Now, the numbers aren't great. Meaning there's not a very large number. But again, it goes back to the amount of data that we've been able to gather. And we can do the same thing with breaches over time. We can look at the actions, the actors, the assets, and that's why this to me this is a fun site. I like playing around in here to look at these various things. You can drill down into various things. A person. What were those over time in the assets and values. So this is something, breach trends is a retrospective look over the last several years at various components. The threat actors involved and the actors they leveraged, along with the assets that were impacted and the corresponding attributes. So it's a way to just do a deeper dive analysis through the entire presentation. And hopefully you guys are, on my screen, things are looking fuzzy. I hope they're not too fuzzy for you as well.
No, everything's looking
I think
fine here.
my connection is slowing down because I'm trying to display so much data. But again, this is a really interesting site. It is available to anybody. That link, Christian, I sent you that link so you can share that with everyone. So it's not a super secret site. It's available to everybody, just like the Data Breach Investigations Report is available to anybody to pull down as well. But there is just a lot of data in here that you can look at and drill down in and understand what's happening by vector, by variety. I can spend hours in here. We could probably do a full 8-hour session just on this site alone.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I do encourage everyone to spend some time and look through here because it is very interesting. But again, when I go back up, this is one area that I really like to look at is to see what those various patterns, what those impacts are in Latin America or any other region, because we use this sometimes when we're talking to customers in other regions because. Verizon being a North American-based company, a lot of times they think we only have information around North America, but we actually do have information you know, around the world on breaches and incidents, you know, as they tie back to the various patterns.
Okay. Okay, so let's switch back to the presentation that we were doing.
And Christian, if you're talking, I can no longer hear you. I don't know if I've
Can you
lost
hear me?
audio, but I know my screen has gotten really blurry, so I think my connection may be getting a little weak.
Can you hear me now?
Which I find frustrating that, you know, that keeps happening today. So I don't know if you want to take back control.
Yeah, I got the control back. Can you hear me? I think he can't hear me right now.
Yeah, I have no audio.
Um, Sorry, we're having some small inconvenience with Mike's audio right now. We're trying to get him fixed. But for the meantime, I want to try to see if we can answer some questions that have popped in the Zoom. I think all the questions that I've had have been related to more that they want get an email regarding it. So there's no questions right now. If anybody has questions, please write them down in the question and answer section, and we'll definitely. So Luis Vielman has a question: if there are some solutions to automate the vulnerability remediation process. Yes, there are. Specifically for Microsoft systems, you can use WSUS, and but there are other solutions and that we offer. I don't know them by heart, but there are solutions that actually could work for you to help you remediate vulnerabilities. Not only operating system vulnerabilities, but as well as application vulnerabilities. Of course, this is taking the idea that we're not dealing with homemade or developed by the organization applications, but boxed applications that actually deliver patches. And there's another one. In relation with web application attacks, is there a recommendation to detect China chopper attacks? We'll leave that question directly for Mike to answer right now, because I think we have him back. Mike, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome back. So we have a small question, and I wanted to leave it to you. In relation with web application attacks, they're asking if there's any recommendation to detect a China chopper attack.
Oh, that one I would have to do a little research and get back to you on that. That's one I don't know off the top of my head, but you know, that's a good question. So if you can get that and send that to us via email, I can have
Okay.
my web app guys take a look at that.
Okay, we'll get you that. So we were wrapping up the presentation, so we'll get to that right now. And so yeah, let's get to that.
Okay. So I think you still have control, which is fine with me, because like I said, apparently my internet's being a little flaky this afternoon, because I think that's what happened. I think it dropped my connection earlier.
Okay.
But yeah, so, and again, you know, the 2021 DBIR highlights, you know, it was over 29,000 security incidents, over 5,000 confirmed breaches that were investigated for this report. And I probably should have put together a little graph just to graph out the 14 years worth of incidents and breaches. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to have the DBIR team do that for next year's report. Is maybe, hey, let's put in a graph here that shows those breaches, you know, throughout the time that we've been doing this, just so we can see how many we've been investigating, you know, in the report each year.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting information to have, actually.
Yeah. And I'd like to see the overall, but I'd also like to see it, you know, per region, so we can see, you know, is it increasing in one region versus another? Because I expect as some of, you know, some parts of the world, particularly those areas that, you know, are not quite as up to speed with internet and everything and the availability of broadband internet. I suspect as they start to get that, we'll see a surge in breaches and incidents in those regions as they get up to speed technologically speaking, and up to speed from a security and risk management perspective. Because it'll still be new to them because they haven't had that level of broadband access before. But it may not be. I mean, it may not be because of things like the data breach investigations report and the work that others, like Verizon and SISAP and some of our competitors have done to overall improve products and services to help organizations in those areas.
Okay.
So the CIS, adding the
Mm-hmm.
CIS controls this year, I thought was a really good thing. And if you look through the DBIR, you may start to see some references to MITRE. I think you'll see a lot more of that in next year's report. As a matter of fact, that's getting added into our services, with the cyber risk monitoring and cyber risk programs. So that's getting added into ours as well, which I think is going to help organizations. There's a lot of organizations that use that MITRE framework as well.
Okay. One of the interesting things that I found in this year's report was that when I was reading the industry section of the report, one of the things that would constantly pop up was security awareness and skill training as IG Group 1 to implement of the CIS controls. I know this is very evident due to social attacks happening so much, but what else would you add to this?
Well, I mean, security awareness and skills training. I mean, I see it all the time, and it's because most organizations are not in the business of cybersecurity, so it's not something that's ingrained in them as it is in us. And so I talk to a lot of people in a lot of different places. They're in the business of making widgets, for lack of a better term, and so they don't associate. It's like, hey, I make this little widget that goes into this thingamabob or this doohickey, and who wants to try and attack me? What are they going to gain by that?
Mm-hmm.
They don't associate with what they do with what the bad actors are after.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why there's that disconnect sometimes, if you will. So the security awareness training to me is key across the board, not just for every organization, but to anybody who's getting on the internet, anybody using a mobile device, a computer, an iPad, or anything like that. We need, in my view, to start teaching security awareness in schools, elementary schools, to young kids, so that it's ingrained in them. It's part of their DNA, part of their culture going forward, is to understand what those types of threats and risks are and what those impacts could be. Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of people just don't associate, well, I make this little thingamabob that goes into this thing, why would somebody want to attack me? Well, you're still a business, you still have money. I mean, mm-hmm. your thing about the widget you're making may be unique, and if somebody else can get the information on the design of that widget, now they can kind of steal your business, mm-hmm. if you will. So understanding that that just the security awareness across the board, regardless of what someone does for an organization, to me is just so critical to every organization. Because if everyone understands that, it improves your overall security and risk posture right off the bat. Because the greatest threat and risk to any organization is us.
True. And when a company is planning their cybersecurity awareness training, do you think it's enough to do quarterly talks where they gather all the people, or is there a better way of doing this?
I think that's kind of going to vary depending upon the organization, the size of the organization, and that organization's culture. Mm-hmm. There's different ways to do security awareness training. We offer security awareness training via online training modules. Mm-hmm. We also have a way where we can combine online training with instructor-led training. because different people learn different ways, and so you need to have multiple different ways to present the information. So that there's some people that are visual. They need to see the pictures and be able to relate to it. Others are fine, just listening to it, through their headphones and watching something on a screen, or even just reading about it. So you need to find what works for people, because everybody learns differently and will retain information differently based on how it's presented.
Okay.
So I'm a proponent of multiple ways of doing security awareness training. And I like having at least an online video training as well as a live human training, because a lot of times people can watch the videos and still not really be sure. When you're presenting in a class, because I've taught classes before, you can tell just by the feeling in the room, if you will, and by looking at the audience as to whether or not it's making sense, or they're understanding, or if they have questions. And a live training affords that opportunity to ask the audience questions. Does this make sense? Is there something you don't understand? Do you have any questions? Do you have a scenario where something isn't clear to you? Describe the scenario and let's walk through it. Because one of the things I've learned in teaching courses is, if one person has the question, there's probably at least 10 other people that have the same question in their mind. We just need somebody to ask the question so that everybody can get the answer.
Very true.
And that's a common problem, is nobody wants to appear, like the one, well, I think everybody else knows this. Am I a dummy? Well, no, the only dumb question is the one that isn't asked, because more than likely there's a bunch of other people with the same question, and nobody just wants to, ask that question.
Okay. And moving to, our gears to the end of the talk to actually answer the question, what is the most lethal cyber attack in a region? I want to put out here that in our perspective, ransomware would be that attack specifically. And even though it hasn't been lethal in our region, it has caused different impacts to health areas, like the attack that just happened in, I think it was Indiana or Illinois, to Johnson Memorial, and the other ransomware attack that happened to the Irish healthcare system. So if an attack of this magnitude, and looking at the DBIR data, which is 10% of the attacks were related, of the breaches were related with ransomware, that's huge. And correlating that with an attack that actually goes into the healthcare system, that can actually kill people.
Right. And I was going to say, yeah, ransomware is the most vicious attack, because, I mean, it can hit anything. But to me, it doesn't matter what kind of attack it is. If it causes harm to people, particularly where someone may actually die because of their actions, regardless of the type it is, those are the worst kind. And what we're seeing is, those ransomware where they are, doing that. They're attacking healthcare organizations in hospitals, in emergency rooms, and impacting those life-saving machines and technologies that are in use, putting people at risk. So anything that puts people at risk, to me, is the worst.
Agreed. And this is a call out to, if there's any healthcare professionals out there, because usually hospitals are the last to call us, healthcare systems are the last to call us, because there is not a regulation in Latin America as there is in the US with HIPAA, and they don't protect their systems. And like we were mentioning at some point, ransomware doesn't forgive. Once you get infected and it spreads, either you have a good business continuity, or you pay. And when it comes to healthcare, it's even more delicate. So I'm calling out to you guys, because it's very important that you guys protect your systems and are ready if any type of these attacks actually happens in a region. We have not seen one yet, but it's a matter of time by the end of the day for this to happen. It already happened in the US, already happened in Europe. We're not exempt.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, we have a lot of healthcare companies on our service. And actually, last year in 2020, one of the healthcare companies, their MSSP was hit with ransomware and malware. But because they were on our program and we had identified, areas that they needed to improve their overall security and risk posture, that ransomware, that malware did not make it to them. Their MSSP was impacted, but not our customer, because of the rules and things that we had identified that they needed to put in place to protect themselves from those types of incidents.
Okay, let me switch over to see if there's any additional questions. I believe there was one that I saw. Oh, there's a couple of them actually. Let me see. So there's another one saying, what would be the security measures to take when you're creating a website?
The security message there is have it tested before it goes into production. Get a third-party assessment and penetration test of that application before you put it in production. Likewise, if you make changes or updates to it, get it retested before you put those changes and updates into production. That's your best bet on making sure it is built properly with security in mind. That's not going to say it's 100% bulletproof, but you will go a long way to making sure that it's very difficult to do any damage.
Okay. Let me see if I have another question, or these are just comments. So one of the other questions saying, what will be the future of companies that do not have a disaster recovery plan in this pandemic that basically affected the whole world economy?
If you don't have a business continuity and disaster recovery plan, when a disaster strikes, you have no plan. You have nothing in place to help you recover and continue your business. So the result of that can often be the end of that organization, end of that company, because they just don't have the plan in place.
Excellent. And one last, I think it is more a comment than an actual question, and saying users that are consuming social media or social media apps that attackers can exploit their identities, and they don't, and basically the companies do not show a real interest of protecting their users. It's hard to build a cybersecurity and information security culture because these people that are posting constantly to social media do not see it as something that they need to do, because it's not natural to them to protect themselves, because they're already basically given their entire life. Those guys that actually post pictures of their food and stuff like that. What would be an action plan regarding that?
Well, that's where you need what we call a BYO, bring your own device policy, to where you can say you are not allowed to have any company information on your personal device. And there's organizations that also will block anybody that's using a mobile device or a personal device trying to get on the internet. As long as you're on company premise, you cannot do that. There's organizations I've seen, particularly those in the financial and healthcare sector, that you're not even allowed to have your personal phone or iPad in your workspace area. It's got to remain in your locker. It needs to get checked in to your locker before you can even access your workspace. So again, it varies depending upon what that organization is, what their function is, the level of confidentiality of the information that they work with, the data they work with. So there are ways to control that. But again, it is a culture shift for many organizations to do that. Particularly if they've been allowing people to bring in their own phones and iPads and laptops and things into their workspaces. It is a culture shift and a culture shock for an organization to implement, those kind of security policies. But then again, that's one way to significantly reduce your organization's risk by not permitting them to bring those in.
Okay. Well, I don't see any more questions. If you have any questions, this would be a time to do it. And because I think we're pretty much done. Just a lot of people asking to get okay. Okay, the question is, what would be a good first alert that a good security system should provide you to stop a cyber attack? I think it's a little bit broad, the question, but I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, that's a pretty broad question because it's going to kind of depend upon the type of attack. So, yeah, I'm not really sure how to answer that because it's very broad. So what I will say is having, good security policies, process procedures, and proper security stacks in place in all your ingress and egress points to your organization's network. And you've got a trusted organization doing the monitoring and management of those devices. So that way, you've got somebody constantly watching all entry and exit points for data for your network, and being able to see when something doesn't look right. I mean, there's a lot of different things. There's firewalls that will fire alerts. There's intrusion detection and prevention systems, including anomaly-based systems, which I've always liked because if suddenly, an intrusion prevention and detection system, it operates somewhat like a firewall. But I like the anomaly-based ones because they will tell you when there's suddenly something unusual, because it'll fire that alert. It's like, hey, normally at 5:45 on a Thursday afternoon, you don't see a spike of 20 gigabytes of data going outbound. Why did you just see 20 gigs of data 20 gigs of data suddenly going outbound from your network? Where was that going? Where did it come from?
And even if it's
so again, it's a big question with a lot of different answers.
Yeah, and going along those lines, even if it's usual behavior to send data at, let's say, like at 5:40, but if eventually you usually send the data locally and suddenly you're sending that data to China, that's a big indicator that something is happening.
Something's amiss.
Yeah, something's amiss. And another question is, how do you realize that a cyber attack is internal and not external?
And again, that's a pretty big question because there's different types of internal cyber attacks that can happen. So, for example, when you're monitoring your entire network from a security perspective, you should be able to see the same types of anomalies internally that you would see. If suddenly you see somebody who normally in their normal workday is not transferring large amounts of data from one area internally to another area internally, and then suddenly you see that, you can go, okay, why did that just, what is that person doing? What did they just transfer that was so big? Because that was highly unusual. So again, that monitoring and management of your overall network, it's both internal and external.
Okay. And one thing to add to that question is that doing a forensic, once you find out that you actually have a breach or you actually are having an incident, doing a forensics analysis on that incident or breach is essential to actually discovering if this was an internal attack or external. As we have seen with the DBIR, most internal incidents and breaches are accidents, are a misconfiguration. It's not something that's done intentionally. Of course, there's some disgruntled employees that will do things intentionally, but if it's an internal cause, I would always take it with a grain of salt that is usually not intentional, and unless it's otherwise confirmed that it was intentional work, to leave it as an accident.
Yes, but it still needs to be investigated.
Agreed.
To make sure. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, even in DBI, most of those are, those miscellaneous errors. Somebody misconfigured something. Somebody put in a new firewall and forgot to, oh, I don't need, I forgot to, close that port. So nothing goes out that port to that other server over there. And, it was left open and something was trying to connect or something was trying to go there. So yeah, I mean, all incidents need to be investigated. When you look at it, in most cases, your security operations center in their initial incident triage and investigations can determine, whether something is truly an incident or not. And then they can also determine a lot of times whether that needs a further forensics type investigation or not. But again, that requires that you have strong policies, process, and procedures, and particularly around incident handling, procedures, because that's where they would follow that to say we reached to this point and we reached this conclusion. Here's how we validated that was the right conclusion, or we reached this conclusion and felt we need to hand this off to the forensics team to do a deeper investigation.
Okay, fantastic. So we actually went a lot over time, with a lot of time we had, so we're going to cut it here. Thank you everybody for joining. As you have seen in the back and on the banner, this talk was actually sponsored by Infoblox. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you guys on Tuesday. Thank you, Mike.
All right.
For your
Thank you,
time.
Christian, and thanks everyone. Apologize for some of the connection problems, but I was happy we were able to get through everything, and I appreciate everybody staying with us.
Have a great night, everybody.
All right. Thank you.